Now, the good news is, some teams we train, I would say in the last 6 years or so, we've done an L481. That's the intent into action course up here for IMTs for Great Lakes Compact and for Minnesota. We do L580 courses. We do, so there's a lot of stuff going on in training. A lot of people have been exposed to this stuff in various IMT meetings annually, do a workshop, things like that. More agency administrators, more FMOs are getting this intent-based planning stuff. So that's a good trend, right? That's a good trend. Because the next thing we're going to talk about is leaders' intent. So leaders' intent is Wildland Fire Doctrine. It's in leading in the Wildland Fire Service, page 33. But this came out in 2007. So it's getting pretty old, right? It's been around a long time. And I would say, based on the incident action plans I see, that we're still maybe at about less than 10% that actually have leaders' intent on them. Now that's good because that's up from 5% a few years ago. So that's good. We're getting better, but we're not getting better fast enough to stay ahead of the power curve. So leaders' intent. This is what we're going to talk about, is how you can create leaders' intent for assignments. Whether you're on an IMT or whether you're just giving guidance to people. So let's go back to our ALs. If we were going to put intent on a division assignment sheet to Division A, it might look something like that. Okay, so what is it we want you to do? Why do we want you to do it? The purpose, tied, that's the gain. Purpose defines the gain relative to the values at risk. And what is that end state? So what do you notice about how this is written, like the tense of it?
Past tense.
Yeah, so an end state is written sort of as present or past tense, meaning you're describing a future set of conditions as if they've already been achieved. So you've heard of painting the picture, right? A vision. You're seeing it already completed. That's what an end state is. And that's how you write it. You write it as if it's already successfully been achieved. Because now, is it very clear to you what I want you to do out there on Division A? What right looks like? Okay, so that's what leader's intent looks like. Task, purpose, and end state. So we're going to take a look at this. Now, anybody done an assignment up in Alaska? 2. All right. You'll have to translate for the rest of us. Okay. All right. So Alaska can be a lot like Oz sometimes. It can go south on you really fast, right? So in this case, instead of division, you're a group, right? Distribution group, we need 30 pallets of food, water, and fuel to the shelter. So, okay. And typically, when you get an incident action plan and you look at your little 204, your division assignment sheet, it would say something like that. Here's what we want you to do. And you're like, okay, why are we doing that? You don't need to know that, okay? We've done all the thinking for you, right? Just go execute. I'm the boss. Here's my card. You're not. You go do this. Okay. Well, I'm the boss, but you're a smaller boss than the bigger boss. So you gotta go. Okay, that's okay. Maybe we don't need to know, right? If it's a normal day, a Kansas day, not an Oz day, you just got the odd tornado here and there, no big deal, right? We're good. So, okay, let's add an end state. Okay, we get it. Now we know what we're doing. But we still don't have the purpose. So, again, the purpose of purpose. Purpose defines what the gain is, right? We know we're taking a risk versus gain. Your purpose is going to define the game. So let's say, because we go out and do this, we've given this assignment to a bunch of 20-somethings, and off they go with their trucks and their pallets, and then Murphy's Law, right? Again, Alaska can be a lot like Oz. All of a sudden, things that were working well, they're not working so good anymore. So what do we do now? Should be pretty simple. Pick up the radio, go like this, and what's going to happen? When you go, what's happened to you? Based on your experience. That's what happens. Because that's Murphy's Law. Every time. Your story, no, you weren't all in here listening to Travis's story, but yesterday, the lookout, the dude with the compass, except it was a girl and she didn't have a beard, and I guarantee she could run faster than that dude could. She goes to transmit, the antenna had come unscrewed because she was climbing through these fences. Murphy's Law. The comms will never work when Murphy shows up. They never do. Doesn't matter where you are. Doesn't matter what year it is. That's the nature of chaos. That's a VUCA environment at its core. It is inherently high risk. So here we go. Can't get a hold of anybody. What do we do? Got a bunch of 20-somethings. Got a bunch of 20-year-olds. When is your brain fully developed? You know how long I was in the Army? Jumping out of planes, blowing things up, before my brain was considered by science, not my mom, to be fully developed. It was a really long time. So we're going to get those pallets across that river because I heard somebody talking about hazard pay. So we're getting those pallets where they need to go because that's what we're going to do. Okay? Is that an acceptable risk? Well, how would you know? How do we know? You haven't told me anything. All you told me was, get this stuff. Okay, so let's say, though, we added purpose. Purpose. Let's say we added a purpose. What would this tell us? What level of risk is acceptable here? Low. So what you're telling me is, right? And guess what? If you had given me this intent, the purpose, even with this, I would go, yeah, that's a no-go. That's not acceptable level of risk. Even I would say that. And if you could get me to say that, you could get 90+% of the population to say that. So you've achieved what leader's intent is meant to do because now you've created leaders at all levels. You cannot have a leader. You can't have me as a group supervisor or a crew leader be that leaders at all levels if you haven't given me the context to continue to make leadership decisions. That's what purpose does. You allow me to continue to dynamically risk manage after nobody can get a hold of you anymore. Okay? What about if that's the purpose? Now what level of risk would you say is probably okay? It's going up, right? Now the tactical situation is completely unchanged, but the strategic situation has changed a lot. You know, the political, the security, the economics, the social, the infrastructure, the information. Those are all the strategic elements of any incident. Those are changing a lot. What about now? How much risk is acceptable now? Probably high risk. Okay, so all we did was change the purpose statements, and look what it did to your assessment. your risk assessment, what was an acceptable risk level or not. That's what you want to empower with leaders at all levels. Now all of a sudden, now it's okay if I get a little creative. But I can still come up with ways now to mitigate it. Now, I won't be the one driving across the river because I realize, maybe not a good idea. But these local river rats now, they can probably get across a lot more safely than I can, right? So we come up with now improvise, adapt, overcome, and we can find solutions in the field to overcome and still mitigate that risk. So all of this basically, it should all go full circle. That's what you're trying to empower with this leaders at all levels. You do all this fancy stuff, you do this 215A for acceptable risk, right? Leaders intent, task, purpose, end state. So now down at my level, the decision that I made about those pallets is perfectly aligned with what you identified at the values of risk back at the first command and general staff meeting, wherever the heck that was, right? That's how you align those decisions. And that kind of stuff should be on my division assignment sheet, that task, purpose, end state, and the risk level. Okay, so I want to revisit the exposure question really quick. Again, different ways of thinking about exposure. There's a lot of different aspects to exposure. So let's say we're able to find a local driver. And let's say she's like right from this area, she's got this little truck, and we can offload these pallets. We can get a pallet on her truck. And she can get them across the river safely. So what kind of exposure is that? Let's take one aspect. How many trips is that across that river? 30. Is it 30?
60.
60. Assuming you make it back at 60, right? 59, I'm not sure, whichever side of the river you want to end up on. But 60-ish, at least, right? So, okay, that's good. All right, that's a lot of trips, though. But is there a mitigation to that? Now, what's happening every time she's calling a load across that river? What's happening to her experience level? It's going up. Oh, that's good. That's good. So how do you think she's doing on like trip number 49? Selfie time. Hey, look at the bear. Look at the bear. You know? So that's a downside. So exposure, it's not just a simple number. There's a lot of aspects to exposure here, right? On one hand, experience going up. On the other hand, complacency, 60 trips, 50 pallets, blah, 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 blah. But by giving that purpose, giving that intent, you can take somebody and maybe we're like, hey, you know what? They were starving, right? Right. So we don't really need to make 60 trips. What if we just get 10 pallets there? What if we get, because that was 3 days of food. What if we just get 1 day of food there this time? We'll leave all the rest of this stuff here, come back, fight another day. Let's just get 10 of them across with her truck. So now we've really lowered the exposure because we understood the end state and the purpose, right? So we were able to find a way to continue to mitigate at that lowest decision-making level. And that decision would have been perfectly aligned with what all those bosses want, So that's a good thing. Now, that's what the convoy looks like. 10 minutes, thank you. That's good. Somebody's watching. It's all happening up here. Okay. What does the exposure look like now? So, we only have to cross one truck one time, but like each driver is a virgin. So, okay, where's the trade-off there? Is there ways we can mitigate that?
Pilot?
Okay, pilot, right? Have you ever seen a big ship when it comes into dock in the harbor? They don't let the captain drive that ship into the harbor. They send out a pilot, and they put him on that ship to navigate that channel because the pilot knows all that, right? So you could have something like that, right? We could give briefings. We could have, there's a lot of ways you can mitigate that, but it's a different level of exposure. What if that's what it looked like? It's 5 trucks, but they look like this. What sort of exposure is that now? That's actually exposure of the cargo itself, right? And what could happen to that. So there's a lot of different ways to think about exposure and mitigations to that exposure. But mitigations are not necessarily the whole answer. Now you can't read this. I don't need you to read this. You don't want to read this. Trust me. This is a big complex, right? All you need to know is there's a whole lot of red on this side. And there's no red on this side. Everything was gotten to medium or low with the mitigations. Oh, that's pretty convenient. I would say there's an agency administrator involved that was maybe a little risk averse. Okay, that's just my skeptical nature. However, let's just say, credit where credit is due, that all their stuff legitimately got everything into medium risk. How you feeling? Is that good? Well, yeah, it's good. It's better than it all being high risk. But are you really feeling? How good are you really feeling, right? So, there's a saying by a fire management officer up in the Northern Rockies, Dave Williams, right? And he says, margin meaning safety margin, right? Margin for error, created through mitigations is misleading. And the reason for that is that exposure factor, because it's this corner, which is bottom right, bottom left, depending on which way your matrix goes, but right here. So you create mitigations and you get to here, but what is the impact? It's still catastrophic, right? So when you factor in that time, that exposure factor, you go from maybe something bad is going to happen today. Well, over an entire fire season, all those operational periods, you're statistically guaranteed something is going to happen. And right now, that's about 19 firefighters a year. Okay, 2018, it was exactly 19. I'm not sure what the numbers are yet for last year. 9. But 9. So that's good. That's the lowest in a while. That's good. Makes it up for 33 during Yarnell, right? So it's so a couple years ago, there's the Soberanes fire. It was a huge fire in California. It was a type 2 or type 1 fire for 86 days. It was at that level. So I worked with the supervisor there, and we figured that was about 70,000 operational people periods. That's a lot of exposure, right? 70,000 people periods. And in fact, there was 2 catastrophic losses. There was a dozer operator that was burned over, and they lost a water tanker. And the driver should have been dead because he rolled off a mile-long mountain, basically. He was ejected on the 17th roll. You have 9% chance of surviving your 17th roll and crash, okay? So this guy, won the lotto, all right? So it should have been 2. So basically, what you have is roughly 19 firefighters on average die in a year, wildland firefighters, not because they're making a bunch of stupid mistakes down in a low-risk environment, but because they're operating ops normal in this inherently high-risk environment. So that's one of the reasons I think something like this doesn't have to be this matrix, but something like this is a more realistic way to think about the risk level that we're putting people into in wildland fire. So that's a lot of difficult thinking. This is Sun Tzu, our favorite Chinese dead guy, wrote The Art of War 3,500 years ago. I got this fortune cookie probably almost 20 years ago now, and I kept it. That is exactly what we're doing here. We're taking something very complex and we're trying to make it simple. And that is a challenging task. That is not easy to do. That is not easy to do. But that's our job, quantifying that risk. Here's a great quote from the book Young Men in Fire about the 1949 Man Gulch fire, a bunch of fatalities with the smoke jumpers. Kind of an interesting connection to the dice analogy. Hadn't learned to count those odds yet, you know. And that I think is the journey of a risk professional, is learning how to count those odds. So I want to leave you with these three things. When you're on an assignment, know what your risk level is and why you're in that level of risk. Or define that if people are working for you. Develop and brief leaders' intent. Put it in your IAPs if you're having that kind of a role, or at least articulate that. And have your crew members state what they think about risk. Formal risk decisions. Risk versus gain. What's your assessment on this? You know, get them thinking in this way so it becomes more intuitive to them. And that will increase the odds of good things happening, right? And it will decrease the odds of bad things happening. Because that's what leaders' intent is all about. Making sure luck doesn't run out. Okay. So, thank you. How'd I do, Terry? And Travis is my backup man, and he reminded me